So, salmon are in crisis. We've been hearing this all morning. What are we going to do about it? Salmon, something about salmon that everybody seems to have a story. Everybody can tell you something about them. You ask a child, they'll tell you something about how silver they are or how high they can leap. You ask an adult, they might tell you that, they're good for the economy, they're good for the river, they taste good. Ask a teenager, and you'll probably get a head down asking Siri what's going on. There's some work to do there. But the key thing here is that salmon are incredibly plastic, they're incredibly resilient, they have got a fantastic ability to survive. They are also no respecter of international borders, and as we've heard today, there's huge efforts going on at that scale to try and do what we can to prevent this decline from continuing. Salmon management occurs at different scales. Internationally, we look at oceans, we look at environments, we look at the large-scale things that are going on. On a national level, we're looking more into our freshwater environments, looking at the quality of the habitat and how we can limit exploitation. On a river scale, we've already seen about the importance of removing barriers for migration, and also looking at trying to maximize the output in terms of smolts that get out to sea. But what we've got to think about is, how do we act together? What do we do now? What can we push forward that's going to make a difference? We need to think how we can best act together. And first of all, we need to acknowledge, as has been said before, climate change. It is happening. It is something that is here. It is not going away. It is not the elephant in the room, but it's definitely the thing we need to acknowledge. It's happening. The evidence is linking trends in salmon stock decline, at least in part, to large-scale climate shifts. We've got sea surface temperature that's going up every decade by nearly 0.2%. And a lot of people might think that's something that we have got nothing we can do about. River managers may decide, well, okay, it's all at sea, and we can't do anything about this. But we shouldn't be sticking our hands in the air and just giving up at this stage. There's enough biogeographic complexity and enough variation in the trends that we see to suggest that, yes, this is going on. The big climate change scale actions and consequences are happening, but there is a lot underneath that we can actually do something about. These complexities, they create challenges, and we need to increase our knowledge of how the salmon is fitting into its environment, its multiple environments, while they are changing, and accepting that they will be changing. So climate change is happening. There's been action on it, but I'm hoping now, after seeing this last week, that we now have evidence that we are altering the taste of the world's great wines, that now is going to be the catalyst for huge amounts of change, and everyone's going to sit up and take notice. Certainly on that side of the pond, perhaps this might make a difference. But anyway, Donald Trump's teetotal, so there you go. Fake news, who knew? So salmon spend their time in many places, and they experience pressures that alter in duration, the severity, and also the effect. So pressures are problems. Some of these pressures might be instant. It might relate to just instant death, getting caught by something and eaten, or they may be much more subtle. They may be pervasive. They may be something that is actually occurring in an environment but not actually having an effect there. For example, they may be substandard. They may have an impact on the physiology. That means when they move to the next location, actually that starts to become the problem. So what we have to think about here is individual times and places, but not forget that they are traveling through these places, carrying the burden of their previous place and time. So these fish are spending time in these places. There are pressures there. And this is just a list of some of them at different scales, different levels. The physics, the actual things that determine the quality of the water, how much water there is, things like temperature. And then it goes down through the ecosystem. Fish have to eat, clearly. There has to be an amount of food there. It has to be of the right quality. There have to be other possibilities for them to switch between diets if that's necessary. They can get eaten, they can catch diseases, and they can be caught. So, sounds like a horrible catalogue of disaster there. And yes, there's a lot of things going on for salmon as they move through these places, but there's also an opportunity here. I think because of this complexity in the life cycle, we can start to break it down. It looks like it will be, we can't really start to address it, but we can and we should. We split it into bite-sized chunks. And as we mentioned already, we have this likely suspects framework. The suspects here are the pressures, the things that are happening, the things that we know. We have a really good understanding of what is actually having an effect, but what we don't know is how they work together and how they are actually being controlled. So rather like this fantastically organised flybox, which I have on great authority, is actually Ken Whelan's. This is the jumble of possible suspects. This is the thing. These are the things. We all have our ideas of what is the best fly pattern to use. In these conditions, someone said it was this. Someone said we should use a sunray shadow. Someone said, yeah, a cascade. It has to be the cascade. And everyone's got their favourites. But often, that choice is not being made from a position of great evidence. The problem is that this starts to become pervasive, and we start to continue that into our narrative about what's happening to the salmon. So there are many potential problems, potential things that are going on. But what the key thing here is that we need to try and fit it all together. We need to partition down, think about what's controlling that pressure, not just about that it's there, it's how it's being controlled, and in what circumstances does it create not only an individual problem, but a population problem. And this is what the likely suspects framework is really trying to move forward with. So wouldn't it be good if we could work together, evaluate these suspects properly in different conditions, different environments, get an overview of what's going on, and think about this in terms of the entire life cycle of the salmon. So perhaps instead of looking at our favourite pool or our favourite river or considering one or two of these potential suspects, we need to be thinking wider. We need to put the fact that the salmon is actually a marine species at the forefront of our thoughts. We need to start considering the marine environment. We need to start thinking about the salmosphere. They don't spend all of their life in the rivers, clearly. We have a fantastic opportunity here. We have got support. We have got an amazing international cooperation started within the likely suspects framework. We've got the spirit of cooperation. We've got support from ICES and NASCO, and we are trying very hard to capitalise on that across different disciplines to try and unravel what is going on across the life cycle of the salmon. So, whilst our management actions may have limited spatial extent, we have to put them into context. There is absolutely no point in continuing to do something if it is not having the effect that we need. We need to think about putting things in order and thinking about how important they are. So the likely suspects framework, what are we going to do? First of all, we break down the life cycle into manageable pieces. We collect historical information. We also work with partners and ask people to cooperate. There's a lot of information out there. There's some fantastic research being done. There is existing information and new. We hopefully will bring it together in some kind of form that can then be interrogated. We're evaluating this evidence. We try to fill in the knowledge gaps. We try to do our best to make the case for what is going on. There is absolutely no point in just stating what's happening without having evidence. We have to do this. It is a navigation system. It's something that we need to guide us into the future. You know, is it worthwhile us spending our money and time on particular areas, or should we be diverted into other places? Supporting the case for changes. Ultimately, we need to do something. It's not an academic exercise. It's not just to be writing some papers and shove them up on a shelf. This is actually, hopefully, going to be the roadmap that we use for positive change. So splitting down into the various different domains, the various different locations that salmon occupy, we can start to make sense of this hugely complex life cycle. Moving down from headwaters down into main stems, out through estuaries and the coastal zone. We have to focus somewhere. We have to think about where we could have an effect. The ocean environment is a phenomenally difficult environment to work in, but we are making fantastic inroads. But perhaps we could start by piecing together what's happening to fish as they move down and move back up in this environment here. The near shore and estuary is particularly important in terms of where fish may or may not be surviving. So again, we need our likely suspects framework as a navigation tool through this life cycle. So first of all, we set the questions. That might sound very simple, but actually it's fundamental. We have to have a guiding set of agreed questions that we're trying to answer. If we don't, we'll be off on every tangent available because somebody has a hobby horse they want to get investigated. We need to agree and stick to those questions, those hypotheses. We need to look for the evidence. We need to set up a framework. We need to use technology. We need to try and gather this evidence from wide and far, bring it together, and have it accessible. This is one of the biggest things at the moment. It's a problem. There's so much data, so much information, but it isn't always all that readily accessible. And there are lots of collaborations, but they aren't all working together. Step 2, the science bit. Actually testing and evaluating and quantifying sounds so simple. It certainly isn't. It's going to be a long, hard process, but it is something we have to do. We need to get that evidence. It can then be used to direct and refine and support the actions we all need. I've heard it mentioned that it's nothing more than potentially an accounting exercise, or there are lots of filing cabinets with data, and yes, there are. I'm sure there are, but in this day, it's not so much that kind of filing cabinet, but it's a virtual one. It's up there, floating about somewhere, and our idea is to try and utilize cloud technology and utilize the time-saving and fantastic opportunities we have now for using big data. In reality, probably a bit more like that in some of the places and some of the partners that we'll be working with. Might be stored away and never looked at, but we're going to try and access all of this bit of published material and grey literature. But there is a problem. There's a thing we need to be very, very aware of. We do not want to start losing our way. We have to maintain the fact that we have got an output, we have got to keep our focus, and there's a risk of being overwhelmed. And this little cartoon, I think, sums up nicely. Everyone talks about big data, but we really need to have an idea of what to do with it. The questions, the hypotheses need to guide us through. So we have a collective effort of the science community, bringing their strength, their skills, and also their guidance into this. We need their agreement, we need to work together. Without that, we simply can't move forward. So some of the things we may be able to move forward in answering, giving more information on from a river management perspective might be that, do we really need to be considering putting out more smolts? Is it a numbers game? Is it just that smolts need to go out? More smolts go out for more fish to come back. Is that right? I don't know. I think that's something we really need to look at. Do we need to think about putting out more smolts or larger smolts? It's fairly clear that in most situations, larger smolts have a higher survival. But again, why? We actually don't know why that is. Is it physiology? Is it because they're being caught by predators? We do not know why. Or do we need to do something else? Do we need to think about producing fitter smolts? That word there just can accommodate a lot of different things, but something in those fish that makes them more resilient, more able to cope with the conditions as they move out to sea. Or do we not need to actually make any more smolts at all? We need to protect the ones we have. We maximize the resource that's there, we maximize their survival chances, and we actually try and keep a hold of what we have left and use that as a seed from which to build back up the stocks. So it's those kind of questions, those kind of things that we need to start putting together. So the likely suspects framework is something that we need. We have a proven plan, it's been used before. It's something that we can actually utilize. It's a roadmap for us. We need to continue to build support. We've made a fantastic start. We have got fantastic cooperation from so many organizations and individuals. It is brilliant to see. But we need to keep that going. We need to keep momentum. We need to keep it going, get the team in place, and actually start to produce. This is what we need right now. And hopefully, we will, with the likely suspects framework rolling out, we will have a major role to play in turning the tide on the salmon decline. This is our roadmap, this is our navigation system, and once we've actually found out which of the least annoying accents to use for our navigation system, we can get cracking, we can turn it on, get cracking, and start to make these positive changes. And hopefully, maybe, possibly, in the future, we can also be rewarded by, when we ask the question of the future Alexa, how are our salmon doing, that we will get a positive response. Thank you very much.